jump right next into the, we'll just go ahead to the next session. We are way behind time, but I will still just follow that order till the end. So the next session is by Hannah, Benjamin, and Geoffrey, who are from MapAction and the Heidelberg Institute of Geoinformation Technology and HOT OSM respectively. And they're going to be talking to us about the sustainability of OSM communities and community engagement in humanitarian mapping activities. So without much more to say, you can go ahead and start.
Yeah, thank you, Laura, for that introduction. I'm just sharing my screen here. So I think we can begin with some quick introductions from our end. I'm Hannah. I'm working as a data scientist at MapAction, and will also be speaking to some work that I did while at the Center for Advanced Spatial Analysis at University College of London.
Hey, hope you can hear me. I'm Benny from Heidelberg, working at HeiGIT and Heidelberg University. A lot of things related to OpenStreetMap data for humanitarians and especially also related to OpenStreetMap data quality.
And I'm Geoffrey with the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, and I'm also a member of the OSM Africa community, and I will be sharing about the research we did with the OSM Africa communities around communities in Africa.
Great, thank you. So I think if we could go to the next slide here, and the one after this. Thanks. So I think throughout this session, we're just hoping to kind of touch on some pretty big questions here. Firstly, what does humanitarian mapping in OpenStreetMap look like? And then secondly, is this mapping serving the community in a sustainable way? And we hope that this will lead to a short dialogue about some potential strategies for ensuring higher quality data and more widespread local engagement, not only during, but also in the years following humanitarian mapping campaigns. So each of us will briefly speak to some research that we've done on these topics to break it down a bit further, and then hopefully have some further questions and discussion after this.
Okay, yeah, so I will give the first round. And so we want to first look at, okay, where do we come from? What has happened in the past? And if you go to the next slide, yeah, this is a sketch of everything that happened in humanitarian OpenStreetMap, the community in the past 10 years. I don't go into all the detail, but we start at the bottom. So the bottom you see, that is the mapping in OpenStreetMap, like for buildings and highways through the task manager. And we see a clear effect of all the major activations that happened in the past. And on top of that, we also see that there are new organizations that have joined the humanitarian OpenStreetMap community, like Missing Maps or Youth Mappers. And then even on top of that, you see even more factors that contribute to this overall community, from the technical tools that we have available, from the imagery that we can use, but also even bigger, the political frameworks that affect the work of the individual organizations. So this is kind of the frame for everything we did in the past. And on the next slide now, we can make this a bit more concrete, I would say. And here what you see on the two maps is like the buildings that have been mapped in OpenStreetMap. And on the left-hand side, you see the global coverage, overall, everything that has been mapped in OpenStreetMap since 2008 and how it distributes. And you see it's Northern America, Western Europe, also parts of Central Western Africa, Nepal stands out here. So that's the overall footprint. And then on the right-hand side, you see all the areas where humanitarian mapping has added a lot. So on the right-hand side, it's all the buildings that have been edited through the hot task manager. And you see that this is having like a big impact in some regions, especially here, again, like Western Africa, Central Africa, Nepal, Southeast Asia. Yeah. All right, let's jump to the next slide now. because it's great to see that there is an impact in some regions, but there's still a problem statement here. And we can maybe start at the top left there. So we take a look at the global population distribution, and you see that SHDI is the Subnational Human Development Index. You see population is distributed in a way that, okay, maybe most people live somewhere in a region that has a SHDI of lower 0.8. And now compare this to the OSM data distribution. Where has mapping happened? And you see a clear mismatch. So you see that 20% of the humans live in the regions with what's called high very human development, but 60% or 65% of the data is created there. And vice versa, if you look at the other way around, in regions with medium human development, you have 36% of the global population, but still only 15% of the buildings and 11% of the highways created in OpenStreetMap. Okay, so humanitarian mapping achieved something in the past 10 years, but still there's much more to do, as we can see by this mismatch here. And on the next slide, we now wanted to check, okay, let's go to the country basis and compare different countries when it comes to OSM mapping over time. And the biggest distinction that we found here, and you can also see them here in the figures, if you start at the very left again, you see that the shape of the graph is like a step function. It could be one or multiple steps. So this means mapping has happened once or twice in a very short time frame and not so much afterwards. And compared to that, the opposite, more or less, is what you see on the very right-hand side, where mapping has a slow onset, like in Tanzania and Uganda, then speeds up, and now eventually, the pace is getting lower a bit, but still mapping is happening. And what we assume, and now that's like the part that Hannah will also talk about next, is that what we see on the right-hand side is more sustainable, because mapping is not only happening once, but over a longer time it is maybe maintained. And this is where Hannah can give us a bit more details.
Thank you. So we can go forward to the next slides here. So I was interested in taking a look at the temporal dimension of data production in OpenStreetMap and trying to understand the extent to which data produced during humanitarian campaigns is actually maintained over time. So on the next slide here is an overview of the case studies that I looked at in this work and focusing on 4 well-documented humanitarian mapping campaigns in Haiti, the Central African Republic, Philippines, and Nepal, and comparing those against a non-humanitarian reference case. And so I used the OSHDB API from Heidelberg to identify all of the features that were created in each campaign, and then analyzed the trajectory of those features over time and took a look at what actually happened to that data. So this figure here just shows some useful context for the volume of features that were produced over time for each case study. And I think here we can see pretty clear differences immediately between how data was produced in the humanitarian cases in the top 4 and the reference case that we see on the bottom of the figure here. I mean, firstly, I think that we can see that there's a significantly higher volume of data produced in our humanitarian cases. And there's a significant peak where we have lots of data produced very, very quickly in response to a sudden onset disaster, such as an earthquake or a typhoon. But then this isn't sustained over time and decays quite quickly. And we can contrast again that against the mapping in Heidelberg, where we see that the volume of features produced over time is relatively consistent. And so on the next slide here, with that in mind, we can take a look at what happens to those features in the years after the campaign. And so this figure shows the proportion of features broken down by case study that have been deleted or modified at least once, which is, I think, a pretty low threshold for acceptable maintenance, 0 to 4 years after the end of each campaign. And so with the orange line on top representing the Heidelberg case, we can see that the data here, over 70% of it has been maintained after 4 years and is on kind of a steady trajectory to being completely maintained over time. And we can compare that against our 4 humanitarian cases, where we barely see above 40% maintenance. And the mapping done in Port-au-Prince in 2010 has produced the most maintenance over time, but it's quite a different story when we look at Bangui or Tacloban, for example, where 4 years after the end of the mapping campaign, barely 10% of that data has been deleted or modified at least once. And so I think while here we're just looking at a handful of cases, these results are suggesting that the data contributed during humanitarian campaigns may be at risk of becoming quickly out of date. And I think that's particularly worrying when we think about the high volume of data that can be added to the map, as we saw in the previous slide. And of course, I think we can all acknowledge that it is incredibly valuable to be able to bring in an international community of mappers to rapidly produce OSM data after disaster strikes. But these findings, I think, suggest that this model of humanitarian mapping may not be providing data that's of lasting to local communities over time. And so I think this suggests the need to continue to work with local communities to engage and help them invest in maintaining data in OSM over time. And so I think this is a good place to turn to Geoffrey to speak about his work with local OSM communities.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. So yeah, I think as we saw from the previous speakers, most of the humanitarian mapping has happened in Africa, and I think it's very crucial for data maintainers to have in active local communities who can be able to maintain this kind of data. So I'd like to share some of the findings from our survey with OSM communities in Africa. So on the next slide, yeah, we conducted a survey with OSM communities from all over Africa. So out of all the countries, we're able to hear from all but 3. And one of the things we're trying to find out is where is an OSM community exists. And this is what we found. So yeah, about 60%, more than 60% of the countries have OSM, active OSM communities. But also we try to look at the data, where does the data exist? And of course, this data also comes in through some of it from humanitarian mapping, other from local mapping. So we see here that Tanzania, Uganda, Zimbabwe are the countries with the highest number of building edits. And on the next slide, we also try to look at the ratio in terms of the population of each country in relation to the number of mapped buildings. We try to determine which one is the most mapped country, which made Eswatini, Lesotho, and Seychelles to be on top there. Yeah, and on the next slide, we also try to look at, yeah, in these countries where there is local communities that are participating, what are some of the factors behind their existence and also active work. So yeah, the Humanitarian OpenSMAP team has been working with local communities and giving grants and also country programs. The other one is, of course, youth mappers, yeah, who are having 105 chapters now in Africa. That is 50% of their global coverage, and the highest numbers there are in Nigeria and Tanzania. Yeah, and of course, one of the other projects that is good to mention is Open Cities Africa, which is a collaboration between the World Bank and also local OSM communities. One of the good things with this project is the connection between local communities and government, which is making the data usage and also maintenance of the data happen between the different players in each country. So over the next 5 years, I think, like Hannah also mentioned, it's very important to have active and sustainable local communities in place in these countries in order to be able to maintain the data. Otherwise, it will stay there, no one will use it, and it will not be sustainable. So what will be, working to set up support local communities in different countries, and we're going to be doing this by setting up 4 regional hubs in each of the different regions, and also investing in technologies to make sure that mapping contributions on mobile and other platforms enable scaling of local contributions to OpenStreetMap. And of course, also invest in data quality and make ethical collection of and use of map data. And most importantly, work closely with the OSEM community and the OSEM Foundation to support the community and the core systems and the software. And hopefully through that, more data maintenance will be realized from our local mapping groups. So back to you, Hannah.
Yeah, thank you, Geoffrey. I think so. Here we're looking to hear any feedback from the audience if anyone has any questions or thoughts on this. And on the next slide, we have some of our own questions, I think, from this work.
So on chat, you have a question from Janet Chapman, who's asking what technologies are using what technologies to enhance mobile are you considering? And have you done any analysis of field mapping versus remote mapping?
Yeah, I think I can speak to perhaps the second question there briefly. Just in the analysis that I did, I was trying to identify features that were added remotely versus ones that were added in the field, but was only able to do this by looking at change set attributes in OSM and looking for the presence of different satellite imagery sources. And so in the humanitarian cases that I was looking at, found that most of the contributions were tagged with a given type of satellite imagery, suggesting that most of that data was produced locally, or sorry, remotely. But I think overall this is a really interesting dynamic to look into, and is one that I wasn't able to do as much as I think would be hoped. So Geoffrey, I'm not sure if you have any.
So on the question about the mapping tools, like mobile mapping tools to make it easier for local contributions, I think this is like in the early stages, but it's definitely one of the goals from the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap has to make possible. So it's in the early stages, and I think we'll do a lot of like community consultations also to try and get their input on what kind of tools work for them and would make it easier for their contribution. So yeah, I think Janet, that's something I can also reach out to the tech team and get more feedback on.
Okay, and also a question for you, Geoffrey, on someone, Paul is asking on the combination of data points for your earlier visualization, and in case he's highlighting the existence of 5 youth mappers chapters in Ethiopia, but at the same time having no local OSM community in the same country. So how is community presence assessed?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, it's not only it's not only Ethiopia. There's also like countries like Egypt, where there is like a lot of like active mapping. But when we reached out, people mentioned like we don't have like any form of organized community. So it's also the same thing with Ethiopia. So the people that we so the survey was targeting people who are leading communities in these particular countries, and also people who are doing OpenStreetMap. So one of the organizations that we reached out to in Ethiopia mentioned, they don't have like any organized community. But the good thing is that, like you mentioned, there is a good number of Rising Youth Mappers chapters, and I think for them to be able to work together, they can contribute and have a local mapping community exists in that place. Yeah, and I didn't pick exactly well the other question you asked about data, Laura, if you could repeat that.
It was the same question, just asking like when you're doing community assessments, since there's inconsistency in terms of the different types of definitions of a community. So yeah, what I was just asking is how community presence is defined and assessed. Yeah.
Yeah, and just maybe to add on that, we reached out to like on different platforms, so on Telegram, on WhatsApp, on the mailing list, and asked people to respond to this survey, and the results that we presented from that survey. So there might be some limitations on who responded and the gaps that we may see in the results, yes.
Okay, there's another question by Peter. I'm not sure who has been directed to this question by Peter. So he's asking no, I think it's just a comment. You're saying he's speaking for consulting engineers. Data maintenance needs STEM to be used for a much broader range of use cases, from procurement, planning, design, contracting, and to project management. Then, okay, I think there's one last question by Olivier, and they're asking, how does one create a community in the localities?
Yeah, I can answer that. How do you create a community? I think like from experience, creating a community is just a matter of, creating a group of people that work together to contribute to the map in a particular country. So one of the activities, of course, is organizing meetups. I think organizing a meetup in your local town is like a good starting place to start and grow a community, but also networking with other groups in other countries also helps to learn from them, like from what they have done, and also grow your community based on their experience. Yeah.
Okay.
I have one comment if I can. Sorry.
Okay.
Just very quickly, because we had like one question and maybe directing to the audience to think about in the next days, maybe like what is the role and responsibility of the humanitarian organizations here? So it's super nice if we have communities that can do this, but we do not have everywhere to do the maintenance, to keep the map up to date. But the humanitarian organizations focused a lot on data creation, and then for some regions at least didn't care afterwards, to be really like blunt on this. So I think that is something we want to raise as a big topic here, and really also make all the organizations available. Like, please, like try together to work together with communities and everyone, like to make like the next step towards a more maintained OSM database. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So I think that's it. So thank you so much to Geoffrey, Hannah, and Benjamin for the presentation. We'll just move on to the next one. So if you could bring up Federica's slides, the tech team.